Not taped, it was a live scramble. There, of course, is great air activity round the clock there in Saudi Arabia. We're back now, Richard, with you. Is that wobbling, wailing sound, does that tell you anything, or is that the continuing alert, Richard?
All right. Reed, I've got a lot of things coming in at the same time. What you are hearing is the air raid. However, I hear from downstairs here in the facilities house that the all clear may be sounded soon.
Normally, the
radio,
continuing wail is the raid.
Reed, I'm told now that the radio is telling Israeli civilians to take off their masks, but to stay in their rooms. Apparently, something still is brewing here in the Middle East. I'm Richard Blystone reporting live from Tel Aviv. Back to you, Reed.
All right, we'll be getting back to Richard Blystone in Tel Aviv and/or the Jerusalem News Bureau that we left when we lost signal. With this in terms
of the radio, so whether there was a hit anywhere, I don't know. It may just have been a false alarm, but there was a full-scale alert. The sirens went off. People went into the sealed rooms. They put on their gas.
As well, as you recall from yesterday morning, there were seemingly coordinated raids. At least one Scud missile was fired and was downed by a Patriot missile in Saudi Arabia. However, several of them did get through on the Western Front and landed in Israel. We're going to go now to Wolf Blitzer at the Pentagon.
Reed, Pentagon officials here are telling reporters that their initial reports reaching Washington from the Middle East indicate, they're saying these are the words, and I'll read them very carefully, that they're fairly confident that what is going on in Israel is not a Scud missile attack. They're not saying what it may be, what it may not be. They are simply saying that their preliminary assessments are that this does not involve a Scud incoming missile attack. Their words that they are fairly confident. Obviously, they're putting all sorts of caveats. There are also no indications, according to these Pentagon officials, that there is any incoming enemy air activity as far as the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia, Dhahran, where we saw our colleague Charles Jaco a few moments ago. There has been some sort of siren alert there, but it's unclear at this point what exactly caused that siren to go off. There could potentially be, this is a possibility, enemy aircraft, Iraqi enemy aircraft going after targets in Israel, but it would be unlikely, at least preliminary reasoning, which would suggest that this is the case, given the fact that very few of the Iraqi aircraft have managed to get off the ground and challenge the incoming U.S. and allied air forces going into Israel. But the preliminary indications are, Pentagon officials are saying here that they are fairly confident that what is taking place in Israel is something other than an incoming Scud ballistic missile attack. Reed?
All right, let's get back to Charles Jaco, who is in Saudi Arabia, and he can give us an update on the conditions there. Charles?
Well, Reed, there's not a great deal going on here. The lights are still on. One thing that's interesting is if you would expect if we were under a missile alert or an air raid alert, there wouldn't be planes taking off, certainly not lumbering, low, slow-moving planes like a passenger liner or a U.S. C-141 transport, but a passenger liner landed and a C-141 took off. Again, the national air raid sirens here in Saudi Arabia have not been sounded. Civil Defense has not sounded its alerts. The hotel has sounded its alerts, ordering everyone into the basement. This happened night before last Saudi Arabia time. It was apparently 2 false alarms based on some problems with the National Civil Defense Network. Last night, if reports can be believed, it was a real alert, and we are told a Scud missile may have very well been knocked down by a ground-to-air missile. None of that is as yet confirmed. Right now, things are fairly quiet here. There's no sign of any kind of aerial activity except for the transport planes that have taken off and landed, and a truck moving behind me on the highway now, and some F-15 fighters that went screaming into the sky on the other side of me maybe about 5 minutes ago. So far from here, Reed, that's about it. No indications that any kind of attack is imminent. However, as we understand it with these kind of attacks, sometimes you never know until it's upon you. But again, the National Civil Defense has not sounded its alerts, just the hotel here, so we're standing by to see what happens. Reed?
All right, Charles Jaco will stand by in Saudi Arabia. We'll continue to monitor the situation in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. And we'll now analyze a negative, something that hasn't happened, but James Blackwell, our CNN military analyst, perhaps can give us a little idea about why it is that there is such little warning, really, available from what is a relatively slow incoming missile.
Well, Reed, you're right, it is a negative. We'll have to wait and see what actually comes. If it's a bomber and not a missile with such long warning, it can't be very many bombers, and it must be a very stupid pilot flying it, because he, number one, has to violate Jordanian airspace to get to Israel, and he'd be taking on the entire Israeli Air Force to do it. So I don't think there's much chance that pilot will survive to hit his target, and even if he does, he must be rather suicidal.
All right, what about the possibility that it is simply a mistake, a glitch in the system someplace?
False alarms are possible, and you can't afford to take a chance when your radar screen says something's coming in. It's prudent to take precautions, particularly when the population is drilled and trained, as is the Israeli population.
If you don't have any on-ground or on-site intelligence, we understand there's about a minute and a half that a USAF satellite can give you, if you're in Israel, of a missile incoming. That's not much time. Does that account for the fact that the missiles had landed before the alarms went off yesterday?
That could account for it, and in fact, a minute and a half is pretty good warning time for a missile with such a short time of flight for a 200-mile journey as the Scud missile.
Do we know how many Scuds and of what kind and variety were on the ground in Iraq before this began?
There are lots of estimates. Certainly among us analysts who don't have access to the classified information, the estimates varied from 30 to over 100, and some even said hundreds. General Schwarzkopf this morning said that even his intelligence didn't give him a precise figure. My best guess is that it was around 100, and that the number of mobile launchers he had was around 30. But again, these numbers can vary widely based on different estimates.
All right, the difficulties of finding a mobile launcher, that's like looking for a pickup truck in a country, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but there's some advanced technologies now in Saudi Arabia that can help locate those mobile launchers. First, once the missiles are fired, what artillery people call counter-battery radars can track the flight of the missile, trace its source back to what launched it, and you can find out the point of origin. Secondly, if the launcher moves, a new radar system called JSTARS, Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar System, can locate moving targets just about anywhere within striking distance of Saudi Arabia and Israel from very far deep into Saudi Arabia. This radar flies in a Boeing 707 type aircraft, and it will be able to pick up moving targets and stay with them as long as they are moving. That information can be relayed to fighters and will allow them to vector themselves in to hit that target if they're able to reach it in time.
All right. There is no electronic wind-up prior to a launch of this crude-type Scud, is there?
There's no electronic wind-up. There is an electrical wind-up and an infrared wind-up that can be detected.
All right. Let's get back now to Larry Register in Jerusalem, and let's see if we have something to have talked about. We hope not. Larry, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I can't hear you, Reed. I can see you on the monitor here, but I can't hear you.
Very well. Tell me what happened.
Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, who we were interviewing live, as Reed well knows, when the sirens went off. I started to come and grab you, but I felt your safety was paramount. What is your reaction to what has happened?
Well, I think it's the best example of what we're undergoing. Saddam Hussein launched missiles yesterday. He may very well have launched them now or will launch them soon. We have to be in a high state of alert. That's exactly what we're doing.
We have reports that some missiles have landed in some parts of Israel. Any comment?
No confirmation of that. I've just checked that. We don't have any...
You checked that yourself on the phone?
Yes,
while I was running. I've been running around to explain to our audience, trying to get the switches back and forth so we can bring this to you.
No, there's no confirmation yet of any sightings. I don't know if missiles have landed in Israel.
We heard from Tel Aviv that they heard jets roaring overhead. I guess you wouldn't know anything about that as well. We have a reporter on the roof in Tel Aviv. He reported to Atlanta through me. He's heard jets roaring over his head. Anything you know about that?
Well, the only thing is, if he did hear jets flying overhead, they're certainly not threatening anyone in Israel.
Do you think, with the sirens going, if there was something tonight, will Israel retaliate?
Well, we've said that the issue here isn't merely one of retaliation. It's one, obviously, of self-defense. I think all your viewers can appreciate that now. We're not going to allow Israel to be in a position where every night or every day its citizens are threatened with gas attacks, with TNT raining down on their heads, by this brutal, savage dictator. He should know that. If he doesn't know it, he will know it.
Moshe Aarons came on Israel TV tonight and in very strong language indicated that Israel had been attacked and Israel would respond. Any information on that speech? This was prior to this occurrence tonight. Any information on what Mr. Aarons may have been talking about?
Well, I don't think that he was necessarily referring to something specific, and certainly not something that I could point out. We have said from the start that we reserve the right to defend ourselves, and a right eventually to be worth anything has to be exercised.
If, as I assume, in Washington they're watching us right now, and you could give a message to Secretary of State James Baker or President George Bush, what would you say to them right now?
First of all, I just heard on CNN, incidentally, the statement of President Bush. I think it was a fine, strong statement. And I think he called things exactly as they are. What Saddam Hussein is engaging in is the worst form of terrorism possible. Terrorism attacks innocent people, civilians, indiscriminately. These missiles flying from Saddam's bases into Tel Aviv, into Haifa, these are attacks of terrorist nature par excellence. So we appreciated very much this forthright statement by the President. We also appreciated his statement that Israel had acted in restraint. We are acting in restraint. We understand also the considerations of the American alliance, the American leadership position of the alliance. But we also believe that America understands, and I got that message very clear from the statement by the President and from others, that America understands our responsibility, our problem of defending our citizens, defending our land.
I've talked to several people in the streets of Israel over the last few days, and the question was to the people in the streets, this is not government leader, to the people in the streets, if Saddam attacked, what should Israel do? And the people in the streets have told me, we have to do nothing now, America is with us, they can handle it. What is your reaction to that comment by the civilian population? Could a response involve letting America respond for Israel to keep you out of it?
Well, we've appreciated the action of the United States. You know that the American Air Force has been active now for almost 36 hours, attacking sites in western Iraq. We take note of that. We appreciate the results, but as you know, this is not a hermetic operation. In fact, we had missiles flying yesterday. I hope that there won't be any more missiles flying today or tonight, but we cannot be sure. And down the line, ultimately, with all our appreciation for what the United States does, what it's been doing, the ultimate responsibility for defending the state of Israel lies with Israel.
We have heard, and who knows if these are true or not, reports about 12 to 20 mobile Scud missile launchers still in Iraq. If the United States could not take these out, do you feel Israel could, and will you?
We will act to make sure, if the present circumstances continue, that Israel is safe from missile attacks.
Okay, another thing I've heard from the civilian population, as you stated, we're just not going to live this way.
Let me make sure that is understood. How we will do it, when we will do it, what the precise nature of our action will be, Larry, is something that I cannot spell out on this program.
I understand. One thing I wanted to get clear from you is, could an Israeli response be letting the U.S. handle it for you? Could that be considered a response?
Well, obviously, if the threat is removed, it's removed. But we shall find out very soon if it is.
To the people of Israel tonight, we're seeing it as seen in parts of Israel now. Any message?
I think they know that the most important thing is to maintain calm. And the most important calm that any people can have is the knowledge that they've done everything that they could.
Well, we don't know exactly what the switch was to Tel Aviv. Do we want to go to Richard Blystone or... No, we'll not do that for the moment. We do believe that the situation has stabilized itself. There's no confirmable attack on Israel, although as we went through this past half hour or more, the air raid sirens had sounded all over the nation, and we'll continue to monitor the situation in Israel. And now we're going to go back, we understand, to Jerusalem.
They're coming back here. Okay, I'm sorry. There's a lot of... Let me explain to our audience, there's a lot of confusion here tonight, so please stay with us. We were talking about the people in Israel and about the situation as a whole. Let's talk about when and if this thing ever resolves itself. Have we gone so far backward in the balance of power in the Middle East and Arab and Israeli conflict? Are we just so far out of any kind of solutions now? Or could this still be resolved in some way that you could see a hopeful solution for some kind of a peaceful settlement in the Middle East between the Arabs and Israelis, between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I think that pretty much depends on the result of this conflict. If Saddam wins, you know what will happen. You know what already is happening. The little Saddams are popping all over the place in the Middle East. He is poisoning, along with the PLO, the minds and hearts of Arabs. He is inciting them, inflaming them with the passion of murder. You know that you talk about the possibility of coexistence and a solution to peace with the Palestinian Arabs, something that we want desperately. Now look what's happening. There are many Palestinian Arabs egged on by the PLO who applauded these missiles that are launched against Israel. They say more missiles in Tel Aviv. Kill as many as you can. Destroy Tel Aviv. Burn it. Annihilate Israel. That's the kind of influence that Saddam is having, along with his closest ally, Arafat, on the direction of politics. If they prevail, peace will not. That is, if it's up to them, there'll never be peace. Now I ask a separate question, a different question. What will the world learn from this? Because we've been saying all along, look, when you ask us to negotiate with Palestinian Arabs, we say, yes, we're willing to do it. We're willing to do it. We seek real partners for peace. No nation wants peace more than Israel. We're at the brunt of war. I'm a relatively young man. I've been through 3-4 wars myself, not counting this one. Now, when we want peace, we want a genuine peace. But look at what we've been asked to do, negotiate with the PLO. Saddam Hussein's closest ally will take the high ground a mile from the Knesset, a mile from where we sit, 1 mile from our parliament. They will be 10 miles from the sea, from the beaches of Tel Aviv. And people said this will be peace. They could target missiles here. They wouldn't need missiles. They could use handheld guided weapons.
I remember when I first came to Israel and I met with you, and if we have a map of the Middle East, if someone could bring it over, I'd like to, maybe you can draw this reference. I asked you about your fears and your concerns and why you wouldn't let the U.S. handle it, and you said, with all due respect to the U.S., we're just not sure that the bigger map, we're just not sure with the margin of errors we live within, the U.S. could act quickly enough. And you took a pencil and showed the lines from where Israel was to where some of your, well, with Jordan and the West Bank and into Iraq. Oh. Maybe if you can get with me on this map, we can show some of our viewers exactly what it is we're talking about, well, of where you are and what you're surrounded by.
Well, I don't think, Larry, that you can.
This is Israel here, and Jordan, the West Bank here, and there's Iraq. Now, from what our information was, some of these missile launchers were right here, and this is one of the things you discussed with me. Maybe you can make it clear for the people who are watching just what kind of threat you live under.
Well, you know, this is the Arab world. I'm just going to put my hands on it for the benefit of the viewers. I have a size 10 shoe, American size 10 shoe. I could walk on this map on the Arab world. Here's Israel. I cover it with my thumb. Now that tells you the whole story. Israel is one of the tiniest countries in the world. It's about the size, a little bigger than the state of Rhode Island. It has to face 21 Arab states in an area bigger than the United States, with all the world's oil, with vast arsenals. And we are asked to defend this tiny country that is being attacked by these voracious, sadistic, and savage dictators with these vast armies. We are asked to defend it on a 10-mile strip. That's the meaning of a Palestinian state. When people say, why don't you give the PLO a state? They're saying, reduce Israel even further. Make it 10 miles wide. Let the PLO, Saddam's closest allies, sit on top of your cities with their missiles, and then pray for the goodwill of Saddam and Arafat. Well, Arafat has shown his goodwill. He said he wants to see the annihilation of Israel. He's called on the Palestinians living on the hills on top of our cities to participate in the war to eliminate Israel. He's called on them to kill Americans worldwide. So when we have been accused of being intransigent, the only thing we've been intransigent about is not willing to die. We don't want to die. What the world has been asking us is not to make peace, but to commit suicide. This we will not do. But to make genuine peace, that is something that we've been praying for, hoping for, sacrificing for from the time of the establishment of the state.
President Bush has said, he said tonight on Israel TV, that will take care of Saddam Hussein. It will take time. He spent the last 10 years devoting all of his resources to the military might. They're going to take care of Saddam Hussein, according to the President of the United States. My question to you is this. If he does take care of Saddam Hussein, is there another Saddam Hussein lurking just to take his place in the Arab world?
Unfortunately, that could happen because the Arab world is the last patch on this globe that has resisted completely democratization. Democracy is breaking out in Latin America. It's breaking out in Eastern Europe. It's breaking out with great difficulty through the concrete of communism in the Soviet Union. It's tried to flower in China. It may flower in China, but the whole world is pressing on it to let democracy come through. It's happening in Albania. It's happening in Mongolia. It's not happening, alas, in the Arab world. And the worst tendencies that we see there is, of course, the tendency of Saddam Hussein. Now, in the presence of this dictatorship, this prevalent dictatorship, if Saddam goes down, we could find another. And another one, with ballistic missiles, with chemical warfare. There are other regimes. There's Gaddafi. There are others. And what we have to be concerned with, if one goes down, another one can come up. So the key to peace in the Middle East, in this kind of environment, is very simple. The only peace that will be sustained is a peace that can be defended. Kuwait lacked that capacity, couldn't defend itself, it perished. We have that capacity. If people ask us to reduce it further, to become so slender, 10 miles wide, we shall perish. We cannot do that. The only peace that Israel can afford to take is a peace that can be defended, a peace that Israel can defend itself, and thereby defend the neighborhood as well.
One final question, please. Syria's Assad has said if Israel does not respond, if they sit back, they'll be taken care of. Do you see a scenario where if you don't respond, maybe it would be better for you in the future with your Arab neighbors or enemies?
I think that any nation around us, any nation around Saddam Hussein must realize that it reserves the right of self-defense for themselves. The Arab states around them reserve that right. They may want to join in collective security right now, but they certainly wouldn't say, well, if Saddam Hussein were to attack Syria, then Syria would not respond. It would sit back and wait. Well, what these countries expect for themselves, they ought to expect of Israel as well. And some of the Arab countries, most notably Egypt, said so openly. I think it's important that Syria recognizes this principle as well.
Deputy Foreign Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, thank you very much. I feel we're in for some interesting days ahead, and back to you, Atlanta.
Thank you.
Right, what we have seen has been the denouement to what looked to be a frightening circumstance when gas masks were put on all over the state of Israel. The air raid sirens warned that something was coming. Nothing has come, as far as anybody seems to know now, and the situation apparently has righted itself, but we were there, and we were there live through all of it. We would remind you that in 2 hours from now at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the Pentagon will have its regular Desert Storm briefing, and CNN will carry it live. And CNN will continue with its coverage of the war in the Gulf.
We're taking you now live to the Pentagon. President Bush just arriving there and apparently being greeted by Mr. Cheney, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell there, Vice President Quayle also there. No microphone, so apparently nothing can be picked up as far as any statement from the president. Meeting inside. All right, I'm Ralph Wenge in Atlanta, along with Cheryl Atkinson.
Good afternoon. We want to bring you up to date on some of the events that have been unfolding in the past hour. Among them, air raid sirens sounded countrywide in Israel and in parts of Saudi Arabia, but there were no explosions and no missiles sighted. The alert has now been called off, but the Israeli officials are trying to figure out exactly what happened and why the sirens went off. As soon as we find out, we will be able to tell you. Iraqi government officials have told CNN's Peter Arnett that journalists may be allowed to see U.S. pilots that Iraq says it has in custody. An Iraqi taxi driver told reporters that Iraqi troops commandeered his vehicle and used it to transport a captured U.S. air pilot. We get more on the day's events before that latest air raid in Israel from CNN's Don Miller.
Allied air forces are on a seek-and-destroy mission against the mobile Scud missiles in Saddam Hussein's arsenal. Iraq has already shown itself able and willing to use these surface-to-surface weapons. At a briefing in Saudi Arabia earlier today, the U.S. commander of Operation Desert Storm made it clear that knocking the Scuds out is a top Allied priority.
This morning, the United States Air Force found 3 mobile erector launchers with missiles on board inside Iraq. These launchers were obviously aimed at Saudi Arabia, given their positions. Those 3 mobile elector launchers have been destroyed. In addition to that, at the same time, we found 8 more mobile erector launchers in the same location. We are currently attacking those launchers, and we have confirmed the destruction of 3 more of those mobile erector launchers, and we are continuing to attack the others, and I assure you we will attack them relentlessly until either we are prevented from attacking them any further by weather or we have destroyed them all.
How many mobile Scuds Iraq still has is a major question mark. Iraq fired 1 at eastern Saudi Arabia very early Friday morning, local time. It was intercepted and destroyed by a U.S.-made Patriot air defense missile.
I had just so happened looked over my right shoulder as I was starting the right engine to make sure the intake was clear, and the missile came off my right side and went up, and I saw the missile go up and snake up and then explode and hit the other missile. And I kind of had a good idea right away that, you know, it was a Patriot launch because it was very impressive, and my confidence in the Patriot is extremely high.
Iraq also lobbed Scuds at Israel. At least 7 of them found targets, damaging property and injuring a dozen people. Israeli officials say their nation has the right to decide how and when to respond to this or any other attack. U.S. officials are urging restraint, fearing Israeli retaliation could cause the defection of Arab members of the coalition trying to oust Iraq from Kuwait. From President Bush, endorsement of Israel's reaction to date and anger about Iraq's motives and methods.
No question that Israel's Scud attack on Israel was purely an act of terror. It had absolutely no military significance at all, and it was an attack that is symptomatic of the kind of leader that the world is now confronting in Saddam Hussein. And that, again, I repeat, the man that will be defeated here. But Israel has shown great restraint.
And as the Allied air raids continue at the rate of some 2,000 sorties a day, a bomber's eye view from the first hours of Operation Desert Storm, courtesy of cameras on board U.S. aircraft.
This is the headquarters of the Air Force, and keep your eye on all sides of the building as the airplane overflies the building and drops the bomb down through the center of the building.
And from Baghdad, scenes from the same period. I'm Don Miller, CNN reporting.
CNN's Charles Jaco has been riding the roller coaster of alerts and then returned to normalcy in Saudi Arabia the last 2 nights. We want to go to him now for his opinions on what it's been like to be in a country where you really never feel safe about yourself and what's going to happen next, and how that affects you psychologically. Charles?
Well, Cheryl, the roller coaster has stopped right now. The air raid shelter here is cleared out. The all clear temporarily has been sounded. As for how you feel living here, well, here are a couple of the things you're supposed to carry with you at all times. This is a gas mask, is probably plain, with a respirator that is supposed to filter out nerve and chemical agents. And this is a chemical protection suit. Now, the blue swatch on it, according to NATO rules at least, is supposed to identify the wearer of this chemical suit as a civilian. And assuming the chemical weapons are not colorblind, it should work perfectly. As for your psychological state here, you get a little batty, frankly, after a while, because the CNN crew here, for example, has been putting in 17, 18, 20-hour days. We've been averaging, I would say, 4 hours sleep a night, but that's generally in shifts of 2 hours and 2 hours. Sometimes you count into that 4 hours sleep a night whatever cat naps you can catch down in the air raid shelter when you're locked in once one goes to the shelter and a raid starts. It starts to take a toll on you. Of course, it's nothing, you have to say, compared to the toll taken on the men and women who are near the front, who are actually involved in this combat, the toll taken on the journalists and others on the ground in Baghdad who are subjected to intense aerial bombardment, and indeed the toll taken on the nerves of the civilians in Tel Aviv and elsewhere who were subject to incoming Scud attacks. But for the journalists covering this, it's a tiring, grinding experience simply because
Charles,
you don't
let me
get
interrupt
enough
you for
rest.
just a minute. I'm terribly sorry. We're going to be right back with you, but we want to let you know that Israeli radio is reporting that no missiles were fired at Israel, and that's very important news that we need to get across. Israel radio reporting that no missiles were fired at Israel. As for the reasons behind the air raid and the sirens, we'll let you know as soon as we find out. Sorry to interrupt you there, Charles. You were in the middle of a thought.
No, that's perfectly all right. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about the report now from Israeli radio that no missiles were launched is you wonder why the air raid sirens were sounded here at the hotel. We were told by some military people that what happens is that the surveillance equipment here will see the radar on the mobile Scud sites once the lids of the tubes are popped open. That is, once the launch tubes are opened, apparently, on the mobile Scud launchers, and this is what we're told, they switch on their radar. That radar gives a distinctive footprint, a signature, if you will. When that's detected, in some cases, the air raid siren goes off. It doesn't mean that the Scuds have been launched. It does mean that someone, somewhere in the area, has detected a radar signature